Millionaire kids had not slept since Mom passed. But the new black Maid changed everything. The mansion had been silent for weeks, but not with peace. Only with restless nights and muffled cries. Since their mother's sudden passing, the 5 young heirs of wealthy businessman Richard Vance hadn't closed their eyes in true rest. Doctors prescribed medicine. Therapists tried counseling, but nothing worked. Then one day, Richard hired a new maid, a woman with no extraordinary resume, no prestigious background, just quiet warmth and patience. And within days, something happened that left Richard stunned. He found his children asleep for the first time in months. All 5 huddled against her, the comfort they lost. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another story that will stay with you long after it ends. Richard Vance was a man used to control. He built his empire from scratch, ran multinational companies, and commanded boardrooms with a single look. Yet inside his grand home, he was powerless. His 5 children, Oliver, Ethan, Lucas, Henry, and Samuel, all under 10, were restless wrecks. Nights stretched into dawn with sobbing fits, tossing, and desperate pleas for their mother. The loss of Claire, their beloved mom, had left a void money couldn't fill. Richard had tried everything. A private pediatrician recommended sedatives, but the boys resisted. A grief counselor held sessions, but the children shut down. Even nannies from the finest agencies came and went, unable to bear the tantrums, the screaming, and the emptiness haunting the mansion's halls. One morning, a candidate arrived who was different. Her name was Miriam, a woman in her 30s with dark skin, soft eyes, and no polished presentation. She didn't flinch at Richard's stern demeanor or the chaos of the house. Instead, she knelt before the boys and simply asked, "Would you like me to listen?" They stared at her in silence, but something about her presence settled the air. Against his usual instincts, Richard gave her a chance. At first, he doubted his decision. She wasn't from a prestigious background, and family friends murmured behind his back. A maid for children who need therapy. But Richard was desperate. He needed someone who could do what money couldn't, help his sons feel safe again. Miriam's methods weren't conventional. She didn't rely on charts or strict schedules. She entered their world instead. When Oliver refused to eat dinner, she sat on the floor beside him and asked him to tell her a story about his mom. When Ethan threw his toys in anger, she didn't scold. She held him and whispered, "It's okay to be angry. It means you miss her." Within days, the atmosphere began to shift. The boys still cried, but instead of isolating themselves, they reached for her. Lucas, the youngest, who hadn't spoken since the funeral, tugged on her apron one evening and whispered, "Stay." Miriam sat by his bed until his eyes finally closed. Richard noticed the changes, but refused to acknowledge them at first. Pride clashed with disbelief. Could this woman succeed where professionals had failed? One night, while he paced his office upstairs, he heard something unusual, a silence so profound it startled him. He rushed down the hallway, his heart racing. There, in the soft glow of the bedroom lamp, he froze. His 5 sons were curled up together, their tiny bodies pressed against Miriam as she sat on the bed, her back against the headboard. Her eyes were closed, her hand resting protectively across the children. They were asleep, deeply asleep. The first real sleep since their mother's death. Richard didn't know what to say. For weeks, he had been haunted by the sight of his sons' hollow eyes and trembling bodies. Now they looked peaceful, their faces softened with dreams, his throat tightened. He should have felt relieved, but instead a wave of guilt crashed over him. Why couldn't he do this for them? Why had it taken a stranger? The whispers of his wealthy circle rang in his ears. A maid will never replace their mother. Yet watching his children breathe steadily, Richard realized she wasn't replacing anyone. She was giving them something else, something they desperately needed: safety. The turning point came the following week. Richard returned from a late meeting to find his sons gathered in the living room. Miriam was reading aloud from one of Claire's favorite children's books. Her voice was soft but firm. Carrying the rhythm Claire once used, the 5 boys hung on every word, their eyes wide, their hearts pulled back into the memory of their mother, but in a way that didn't bring pain. When the story ended, Oliver, the eldest, spoke words Richard never expected. "She makes me feel like Mom is here." Richard's chest tightened, his eyes burning. Ethan nodded vigorously, adding, "I'm not scared when she's with us." Richard tried to compose himself, but the effort was useless. His throat tightened and tears welled in his eyes, blurring his vision. He realized then that his children hadn't only lost their mother's warmth, They had also lost the feeling of being held, soothed, and truly understood. They had been left to drift in a sea of silence and grief, clutching at memories too heavy for such small shoulders. No amount of doctors, therapists, or expensive distractions had been able to touch that pain. No amount of wealth could purchase what they needed most. Miriam, with no title or fortune, had given it freely. Later that evening, Richard pulled her aside in the quiet of the hallway. His voice, usually steady and commanding, cracked with vulnerability. "I don't know how you're doing this," he admitted, his words heavy, almost ashamed. "But you've given them back something I thought was gone forever. They look alive again. They're laughing. They're resting. I didn't think that was possible anymore." Miriam met his gaze with quiet dignity. She didn't smile, nor did she bask in his praise. Instead, she spoke softly, firmly, as though stating a truth she had always known. "Children don't need perfect answers, Mr. Vance. They don't need someone to fix every broken piece of their world. What they need is presence. They need someone who listens, someone who stays, someone who won't leave when it hurts." Her words struck him deeper than any business loss ever had. Richard was a man who had always measured worth in success in numbers, in profit margins and trophies of achievement. But in that moment, stripped of his defenses, he understood how hollow that scale was in the face of grief. For once in his life, he was humbled. From that night forward, the mansion began to change in ways Richard hadn't imagined possible. The echo of footsteps in its long corridors no longer carried only grief. They carried laughter, soft and uncertain at first, then brighter, freer with each passing day. Where meals had once been silent battles with untouched plates, they slowly transformed into shared moments. Miriam encouraged the boys to tell stories about their mother, and soon dinner became filled with giggles, memories, and a healing kind of honesty. At night, the boys clung to the rhythm Miriam created. Songs hummed gently as she stroked their hair, bedtime stories told with patience, and the reassurance of her steady voice repeating, "You're safe. You're loved. You're not alone." Their restless cries quieted, and for the first time in months they slept through the night. Richard's respect for Miriam deepened with every passing day. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was the anchor his fragile family needed, the steady presence that had pulled them back from despair. For the first time since Claire's death, Richard allowed himself to hope, not just for his children's healing, but for his own. And in his reflection, he realized something profound. Healing does not always arrive in the packages society expects. It doesn't come wrapped in prestige, education, or wealth. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet courage of someone overlooked, someone willing to sit in the shadows of grief without turning away, someone with the patience to hold pain until it softens. One evening, Richard lingered by the bedroom doorway. His 5 sons lay curled together on the bed, their heads resting peacefully against Miriam as she sat propped against the pillows, her eyes closed in exhaustion, but her arms still steady around them. The scene pierced him with both sorrow and relief. For the first time in months, they looked safe. A silent vow rose in his chest. He closed his eyes and whispered to his late wife, "They're safe now, Claire. Because of her. Because she stayed when I did not know how." And that night, for the first time since the day he had lost her, Richard returned to his own room. He lay down, exhaled a long breath, and allowed himself the gift his children had finally found: sleep. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected towels. And let us know in the comments where in the world are you watching from. We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.